Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. What the Truth Can Destroy. Episode 158.
A wordless flash of insight. People having different probabilities of using particular words, phrasings. It doesn't have to be that exact thing. It just has to be any law known to the far more literate Dath Ilan, or just wordless style, or sheer assessed intelligence. Keltham may have ways of determining whether two books are really by the same author.
Yes, occurred to me too. Just the way teachers deliver the same lecture differently, it doesn't have to involve any law. The actual author of one of them also authored a fake history of Andoran and a fake history of Galt for us, and another one's going to have been co-authored. Carissa is not in general faster than Asmodia to wall concerns, but with the headband on, she sure is.
Oh yes, the proprietor says. The author of The Revival of the Empire wrote a few other histories which I thought were, if anything, even worse. I stocked the ones for Andoran and Galt because people like reading those, they sell well, but they don't like reading the one about Absalom because it's so inaccurate, which should really make them think, if you ask me. And a tactical account of the Chelish Civil War is co-authored by a Chelish general and the military historian Caris Thembly, and I know Thembly's put out one on the Galtan Revolution as well, though I don't have it in stock.
He'll take those then. Sure, the conspiracy could have thought of that, but it's more competence than they necessarily needed to have. 1.7x to ordinary or so. Now how many similar books does he have about Taldor, Osirian, or Nex?
Well, not the textbooks, since they don't have standardized education. I've got, let me see for you, 8 volumes on the Nex-Geb War, a guided tour of the Mana Wastes, Magic and Quantium, The Last True Princes of Taldor, Rot Behind the Great Walls, that's Taldor, Taldor's War with Kadira in 6 volumes, Osirian in the Shadows of Giants, Osirian Land of the Pharaohs, and trade publications for all of them, I suppose.
All right then, he'll pick all of those up. How much does he have about theology, alignment, afterlives, such that Asmodeus or Hell would have significant coverage, like at least 1/12 of the book?
Asmodeus isn't a big god here in Absalom. I've got Asmodean teachings and towards an Asmodean state, and then it'd be harder to assure you you're getting 1/12 of the book, say, if I sold you The War That Made the World, about the sealing of Rovagug, or On Earthfall and how civilization survived it, which is largely about the gods who perished in Earthfall, though it does discuss all the other ones who were around, or the death of Aroden.
That's 5 books with noticeable sections on Asmodeus, Lawful Evil, or Hell. He'll take those, sure. Any more?
A wordless vision of a cloud of density. There's fewer alignments than countries. Alignments are relevant in all the places, including Absalom. There should be more books talking about lawful evil in this shop. Then there are books about Cheliax or Nex.
Oh, I don't know how I forgot it. Guide to Devils and Indentures for people thinking of selling their souls. I'm sure I have a copy somewhere. The church releases updated versions of that regularly. Hey, wizard fellow, can you spare an old man a locate object? I genuinely have no idea where I filed Guide to Devils.
Didn't prepare it, says Fenellosa irritably.
Should I go look for it?
A possible lie is that the church formally disapproves of non-church writing about hell because so much of it is incredibly wrong and misleading, sometimes hazardously so. What do you think, Asmodia?
He's going to consider the likelihood that conspiracy doesn't want there to be any books, versus his prior expectation that ordinary would manage not to have those books for any reason. Then he's going to look at the reason and see if it's a surprisingly good one or a surprisingly bad one. And I'd say that one leans surprisingly bad. If there's people running around writing books personally critical of the Queen, is he going to buy that everybody just fell into line about the church not wanting people to write about hell?
Well, there's a lot more access to information about the Queen than to information about hell. And the Queen doesn't have power in Absalom, but all Absalom's churches collectively do, and might agree not to spread nonsense.
Message, one more book, and one the conspiracy would have obvious reason to prepare, is not worth a lot of searching, no. Keltham was hoping there'd be more like 20 books about comparative major gods, somebody's pet theory about the 9 alignments, that sort of thing.
Well, you'd best take that up with the church's son, because I'll stock the books if they change their mind. Same goes for pornography, actually.
The churches object to there being books about gods?
The churches object to books purporting to describe the gods and the afterlives which aren't issued by the churches. because of how most authors will make up lots of details to fill out thin bits of the books, and then you'll get lots of people believing nonsense. Now, I think there's a case to be made that maybe the gods should learn something from the kinds of stories about them that people want to tell. If people desperately want to believe Iomade sends songbirds as signs, maybe she should start. If they want to believe Norgorber only does crimes that don't hurt people, maybe he should mind that. If they want to believe Serenre marked their enemies with an irrevocable blood taint back in the time of Rovagug, well, I guess I see how that one's no good, but you can only ban that kind of thing and leave the nonsense be.
Have you by any chance got church-issued books about each of the afterlives then? And are Asmodean teachings and Asmodean state both church-approved?
Yes, they are. That's why we carry them. Asmodean Teachings has a lot about hell. Some places it's published in 2 volumes, where one is called Asmodean Doctrine and the other is called Hell. I can get you the approved books for most of the other afterlives except Abaddon. Norgorber's church doesn't bother putting one out, and I've never bothered looking farther. It's not exactly a bestseller.
It would explain why Ione couldn't find books of comparative theology either. It also sounds an awful lot like an excuse. And if the conspiracy isn't trying to deliberately misdirect Keltham's attention, and they weren't that clever, at the first point when books of comparative theology started not being in the Archduke's villa or the Ostenso library, then it implies that the conspiracy is trying to hide something about afterlives, gods, and theology. It feels like the worst news of the day so far. Worse than Ione not being in her usual place in the library, to the point where he should wait for it to stop feeling bad before he tries to put numbers on it. This can't be that improbable and ordinary, right? Keltham will take the standard set of church books then. On to fiction. What's has the proprietor got with magic? Gods, afterlives, even if a church had to approve the book. People going to magical academies. Mysteries that hinge on facts about magic, or at least involve technical discussion of those. People going to afterlives and coming back. A character goes to a temple for training at some point. Romance novels with Chelish protagonists or love interests. Also anything that would be, like, fun to read if you had high intelligence and wisdom. But that's a separate question so long as he's here.
Magic's easy. He can recommend a solid dozen works of fiction that are about adventurers having terrifying, very much magic adventures. And this is a series of teen adventure books about a cruelly treated wizard's apprentice. And here are some court intrigues that involve magic spying and murdering and so on. They have precisely 1 Chelish romance novel for Alter Cheliax. He drags it out. If you like this one, let me know, and I'll arrange copies of the rest of the series. There's 5 or maybe 6 by now. He's much more at ease trying to recommend books Keltham might like. He's curious what books Keltham has liked in the past, whether he likes serials, whether he likes books to be about redemption and moral dilemmas, whether he likes them to be about people getting hurt and then slowly recovering their health, whether he likes books about attaining enlightenment, whether he likes books about elaborate revenge.
Keltham may send back later at some point for those. He's not quite in the right mood for it now. He'll take a couple each of adventurers and mistreated apprentice and court intrigue, a dozen books about redemption and moral dilemmas if that many are available, a couple of hurt, comfort, and attaining enlightenment, and whatever the proprietor thinks is the most intelligent book about revenge. Any novels set in Galt?
If there was 1 novel in Cheliax, there should not be 10 in Galt.
There's 2 about people who fled Galt when the revolution started, one in which they're now in Taldor and one in which they're now in Absalom.
Good enough. Not novels the conspiracy could have prepared, unless they were covering an impressive number of bases. Purchase it all if the price is reasonable. Haggle briefly if required. I can and will buy much fewer of these books. Ping back for instructions which ones, if he tries to gouge us on it. Keltham is trying harder now, not to think of his next steps.
Abigail sends that she thinks she can do a better job of reading Keltham's mind, even if he is trying to conceal his thoughts. She does not add that things are looking increasingly serious to her. That would be policy advice.
Things are definitely increasingly serious. Not that she was in any sense not serious about them an hour ago, but Keltham is trying very, very hard at this, and the conspiracy is a thin layer of paint in many places. Carissa would be very grateful to have Abigail and not an 8th Circle wizard from the front reading Keltham's mind.
She's wearing Carissa's old headband now, and boosted to +4+4+4 in wisdom and splendor as well. It's not nearly 2/3 of her crown, but it's enough that she can be useful. Keltham is planning to try an expensive proprietor, The sort who'd need defenses against people coming in and taking their stuff using mind control.
Great. It's not great. What's the time estimate to mock up a magic shop in a much cheaper shop they could pay the proprietors to clear out of? It can be mostly illusions, but they need to beat Keltham's determined effort to disbelieve them as illusions. He's likely to want them to hold items up to the scry for detect magic, which can be faked with magic aura, and he'll have endless questions about the prices. No, wrong line of thought. Find an actual Absalom magic shop. Use an illusion to make the purchased storefront immediately and exactly resemble it. Copy their security situation. Copy their customers, if they presently have any, and tell her how long they need the bookstore to stall.
2 gold per. My time is valuable, and I'm going to get annoyed if you haggle about it too much. I can leave half these behind and make sure you get less pay overall, even if I end up having to pay you an inflated price.
The textbooks sell for 3.
What, really? Why?
Diagrams, maps, visual aids have to be copied by hand, and there's a lot of diagrams in there.
Huh, fair enough.
Keltham does not presently seem suspicious of this. A lot of his attention is going towards thinking of things that are not his next action.
Do we have anything planned if Keltham wants to spot 5 expensive shops and randomize between them only after he numbers them?
Greater false vision. Just waiting on giving the illusionist who's going to cast it a bit more practice with Keltham's weird visual, which she strongly expects has to be exactly right or he'll notice, and with mirror reflections inside a scry. Somehow this isn't something even senior illusionists have prior practice with.
Somehow Asmodia was thinking in the back of her mind that if they just resorted to greater false vision, the tropes would make them lose, somehow, because that was too much like cheating. But if the real nature of the game is that Keltham has a timer he doesn't know about, until the conspiracy can start faking everything, that might be a fairer game from the perspective of the tropes. It'd be relieving, except for the part where she does not in fact want Cheliax to win.
That possibility had also crossed Carissa's mind, though she's mostly not trying to reason with it. She's not sure it works to reason about how to be in the story you're in, even if she is reluctantly, angrily going to concede that there seem to be story-like forces around doing things. Is she somehow a secret cleric of Aurori? Consider question later. Anyway, greater false vision doesn't make things easy. They'll need to have the original guy going around doing things in Absalom for the illusionist to tweak on the fly.
Okay, everyone! We're coming up on a part of this flag event that's particularly dangerous for Asmodeus' interests. Pretty soon it's going to occur to Keltham that the real reason why bookstores don't carry pornography isn't that the churches dislike it. It's that the conspiracy wants to prevent him from checking whether masochists are real!
Yep. Luckily for the conspiracy, masochists are real. And some churches really do frown on hardcore erotic works, which nonetheless exist, and Keltham can be presented with them. Furthermore, Absalom has an entire underground network of brothels specifically for beating up wealthy men who are into that. Carissa checked. She's pretty sure that if Keltham turns his mind full bore on the question of whether masochists exist, that's a good development.
You'd be right if Keltham had unlimited time to look at things and think about them. Unfortunately, even when arguing with Keltham, being right doesn't mean you win the argument if Keltham has limited time to think. Keltham has to worry about the conspiracy's illusions. He has to worry about the conspiracy's operatives running ahead of him and telling brothels to claim they offer that service. He has to worry about whether the conspiracy commissioned the existence of around the same number of fiction books, like that, as they commissioned for Chelish history books and books about Asmodeus. Keltham has to ask himself how likely it is that churches frown on hardcore erotic works, and that's why the small disreputable bookstore you find has only a small handful of hardcore erotic works written from the viewpoints of masochists enjoying themselves. Keltham has to ask whether the conspiracy is stalling him so he doesn't get done the rest of what he wants to do, or so he'll slip up and think of what he's planning to do next. Keltham will probably decide to give up on going through the whole tour you're planning now of the real evidence that masochism exists, and go ahead with the rest of his scheduled plan for checking on things while fighting an increasing sense of internal horror and his mind trying to take refuge in the thought that maybe none of this is real.
That doesn't really seem like the Dath Ilani thing to do. Looking into a question shouldn't predictably update you in the wrong direction.
It's not predictable to him. Most of Keltham's update will happen at the point where he thinks of how convenient it is for the conspiracy that the bookshop doesn't already carry erotic fiction. Then Keltham tries to think of ways to check on things quickly, and later tries to find an erotic bookshop that's large enough to have more submissive viewpoint erotic novels than he thinks the conspiracy would have prepared. Keltham isn't expecting to be able to find a bookshop like that quickly, and Lord Fenalosa won't be able to. Since Keltham was expecting that result even in the ordinary world, he doesn't update much on it. That leaves Keltham with mostly the same probability he got after he realized the conspiracy's reason for saying that bookshops don't carry pornography. Keltham won't think of looking for brothels that cater to male masochists without you suggesting that. And if you do suggest that, he'll think it's something the conspiracy could illusion or send somebody ahead to mind control people about. Or bribe them, now that Keltham has seen that Golarian employees will take bribes.
Absalom has trashy tabloids that report on the sexual exploits of prominent people. They have a published guide to all the best ladies in all the brothels in the city. A couple years ago, a particularly lurid book prompted debates, which were reported on in the newspapers, about whether there should be more of a crackdown on the brothels where you have pretty women beat you up. And those are just the things Carissa learned on a cursory look. Keltham, turning his full creativity on the question of whether there are masochists in a city that in fact has hundreds of thousands of them, is not going to just ask if there's a single well-stocked, well-known bookstore with hundreds of books and then give up entirely.
Keltham doesn't know the rules of magic or the rules of illusions except for what the conspiracy has told him. From his perspective, anything he sees can be fake, anything he hears can be fake, all of his messages can be intercepted. The only thing that Keltham can trust even a little is information that would be expensive for the conspiracy to create or edit. A single published guide on prostitutes isn't that, because it's easy for the conspiracy to edit a guide like that to say that some prostitutes offer the service of beating masochistic men without them having to edit the rest of the book. Keltham is thinking about informational things that are tangled up, where changing one aspect of the thing would require lots of other changes throughout the structure of information. Keltham is thinking about being able to ask lots of questions with an unpredictable structure that the conspiracy couldn't have traced out in advance. Snack Service can guide him to something like that, about masochism, since it actually exists for that. If Carissa Savar can think of where Keltham should look to find it quickly. Snack Service can't actually tell Keltham exactly where to look inside a library's archive of all the newspapers to find all the debates, though. That's not really in Caden Kalian's domain.
Well, someone in Absalom almost definitely has a very large private collection of erotica. They'll just have to figure out who and then steal it and put it in a bookstore? She doesn't like that plan at all. Maybe Keltham would be too relieved to find the evidence he was hoping for to think about the coherence of the world. But it's not actually coherent. For it to be in a bookstore, the way it's coherent for it to be in a private collection.
Snack Service could just tell Keltham where to find a person who has a private collection of erotica like that, and tell Lord Fenalosa to say he's calling in a favor owed to Lady Sally. Lady Sally is a worshipper of Caden Kylian, and she'll forgive him about it eventually.
Okay, Carissa does not trust that at all. How is Snack Service purporting to have Lord Fenalosa know this?
Snack Service is suggesting that Pilar literally just hand Keltham a cookie and tell him.
Carissa needs a minute to think. It does not actually seem to her like an impossible task, even with a conspiracy messing with you, to figure out in a large city with a major underground flogging scene that masochists exist. Keltham is very smart. Generally, he thinks of the things she thinks of and then some. If he tries to think of every possible way to test whether masochists are a thing, he should determine that they are. It is nothing like what Keltham tried to teach them about how to think, to pose only tests you expect reality to be unable to pass, and then stop testing and apply no further creativity to the problem. But Keltham is clearly not at his best, and his efforts to not think about his own plans are plainly hampering his creativity enormously. And he has some kind of irrational utter horror of specifically the masochists don't exist scenario. No. He knows how to correct for that. He's not going to steer with that. He's not going to decide conspiracy on the basis of a fact about the world that's actually true, because Absalom, a city that has mostly small bookstores with a handful of books on history, entirely predictably doesn't have enormous bookstores of obscene literature. Even under pressure, her Keltham doesn't make errors that silly. Is what using her own reasoning skills to think about the question produces as an answer. But snack service hasn't been wrong before. And what is Asmodeanism about, really, if not ignoring all reason and obeying? We'll take the cookie. If, substantial if, Keltham doesn't in fact think of any creative ways to check once this occurs to him.
Fenellosa heads out of the bookshop with his purchased books. Requesting permission to get lunch from a street vendor, he says as he does. Should only take a minute. And they've planted a vendor just in case Keltham wants to ask the vendor questions.
Does the conspiracy need one additional minute to complete a task? Keltham could have slipped up on avoiding mind reading. Chance that somebody in Ordinary would arrive for this mission while having still not eaten. No, Ordinary was trying to move very quickly per Keltham's request. Sorry about this, but you okay if we complete the next task in the sequence, which I'll try to keep quick, and then lunch?
No problem.
All right. Next up, spend a minute striding around and giving me a mirror look at the shops around here. Keltham would be doing a very good job of not thinking about why he's looking for more upscale shops, if anybody not on the level of Abigail Thrune were trying to read his mind.
Keltham is thinking about shops that sell scrolls more than shops that sell magic items.
They'll be the same shops. What difference is he thinking of?
Fenellosa is happy to do that. Look at all these people, all these storefronts, that Absalom skyline in the background, those brothels over there, that man towing a herd of goats through the street.
He doesn't know they're the same shops. Keltham is planning to check prices. He thinks the prices on scrolls are weirdly high, and that we're maybe trying to control what magic he can access. He can ask the scroll be brought back and verify it was a real scroll shop that way.
He can look around in the shop and buy an obscure scroll. Look at it in front of the scry to verify it's the same scroll that will be brought back. That would help verify the storefront wasn't just illusion, because the whole trip was just illusion. But it sounds like we've got that covered.
The special shop can have a gorgeous obscure scroll display in the front window. To your left, Fenellosa.
Sure, he'll walk down this street to get out of the way of the goats. Pass a weaver, a shoemaker, a magic shop with lots of scrolls in the window.
Keltham does notice, but the earlier sight of what are obviously sex workshops, in a city supposedly too prude for written pornography, has now started Keltham down the road to inner panic by a completely different route. Is there any way, if the ordinary world is true at all, could the ordinary world prove itself to him? Obviously by having enough erotic novels written showing the character viewpoint of a masochist. But Keltham hasn't been having much luck with his previous literary queries, as is, of course, not a very good sign at all. But it does mean that the surviving ordinary worlds are just like that. How would Fenellosa even find a shop that carries church-disliked books? This city has no searchable index, and that shop might not be listed in the regular index, even if the city was searchable. And then that shop will only have 4 erotic novels written from the viewpoint of a masochist, and that'll be the same quantity that Conspiracy faked for Chelish history books. If Carissa is right, then half the people in his field of vision are genuine masochists. But how does Keltham verify that, in the presence of mind control and illusions and mind-reading and alternate physics that the conspiracy could just be lying to him about? Is there any equivalent of a move-counter-move search tree that the sex shops could be real? The conspiracy has no reason to show those to him after making that claim about pornography, if they're not in a real city, or at least not basing all this on a real city. But if the conspiracy passed the test with that priest of Seren Rai, they've obviously got control of questions and answers. Any question Keltham knows how to ask a masochist is one whose Keltham sought answer the conspiracy can guess, especially if they're reading his mind. There'd have to be some way to ask a question that only a real masochist could answer quickly, that somebody pretending to be a fake masochist couldn't answer quickly, and whose answer Keltham can verify after the fact, without himself knowing the answer beforehand to expose to mind readers. Nothing like that is going to exist, obviously, and if Keltham hairs off on that, it gives the conspiracy more time to fake things inside that scroll shop. He should just go ahead and try the scroll shop, where things might actually work, and consider what to do later on the impossible problem of checking for masochism when there's no reasonable way to locate a high concentration of ill-advised books inside Ordinary, when Ordinary can't even locate a high concentration of Chelish history books.
Can snack service please intervene now?
Yes.
Hey, Snack Service says that a retired World Wound warrior named Arnson Puddleton, who lives in the mini manor on the other side of the alley back of the Laughing Sword shop in Ivy District, has an exhaustive collection of erotica featuring submissive protagonists and would let Lord Fenellosa in to browse through it if Lord Fenellosa says he's calling in a favor owed to Lady Solly.
Can snack service please tell me where I can find a similar concentration of Chelish history books?
It says that's not in Caden Kylian's domain the way that Arnson's erotica collection is, and also that the decision theory continues to be complicated. You're inside a lot of different possible worlds right now from your own perspective.
How were the impending Rovagug cultists inside Caden Kylian's domain?
Snack Service says they weren't. Another god watching out for that saw the Rovagug cultists and pointed them out to Caden Kylian, who got permission from Broom's god to tell Snack Service. I really, truly, sincerely, honestly, and wholeheartedly wish I had some way to let you punch my curse in the face, for whatever that's worth.
Am I going to be able to borrow any books from this collection, just to verify that they all actually exist? And the conspiracy didn't just have 20 erotica authors write a page apiece for 20 fake books like that, once they saw how my book browsing habits worked just now.
Snack Service says Lord Fenalosa can probably talk Arnson into that, if Fenalosa says it's for important research purposes and promises sincerely to bring the books back within a week. Yes, I know.
Keltham has simultaneously been keeping an eye on the scry while this was going on and hasn't spotted any other shops with scrolls in their display window. Yes, it could be a conspiracy plant because they were reading his mind, Keltham is aware. Message to Lord Fenalosa. Head into that scroll shop from a block or so back. Keltham will look into this erotica thing later, but he is already pretty sure it's going to work out exactly like Snack Service says. Keltham is not even sure why he is trying to hold on to his feeling of annoyance, unless it is so that he cannot feel desperately relieved. It just seems like annoyance with Snack Service is really truly warranted at this point.
Lord Fenalosa turns around and heads back to the scroll shop.
I'm not entirely sure I followed all that, Carissa says quietly to Pilar. But thank you, Caden, if you just made it possible to convince my boyfriend masochists exist.
That's totally heresy even by Project Lawful standards, and literally the Queen and Aspexia Rugaton are both listening. Oh, she just said that for Keltham's benefit, right? That thing Keltham said about quickly writing 20 pages each, apparently from different books? That's smart. They should do that right now for Chelish history books and have those ready to go in case Keltham thinks of visiting a library. Keltham may not bother if he can't buy or borrow books from that library, especially now that he's described that strategy out loud. But we should actually do it in case he actually does it.
Carissa's not very worried about heresy right now. If she wins, it doesn't matter, and if she loses, it doesn't matter. If Alter Carissa would have no reason to hesitate to thank a chaotic good god barely in her boyfriend's earshot, then neither does she. But that said, yes, one of the big errors was not really having a defense in depth. It would have been ludicrously expensive, but that's precisely what would have made it credible. It wouldn't exist in Alter Cheliax either, not in random bookstores in Absalom, but it'd be a smart place to depart from it. They should have 20 pages of 10 different books on every possible topic.
Though Keltham may also, having said that much out loud, carry out the strategy of starting from a random open-page flip like that, and reading forwards from there, or backwards. Which means we need several pages forwards and backwards in each direction if we don't want to get caught like that immediately. First priority, single 2-page spreads of open books. Second priority, sections that go 2 pages back and 10 pages forwards. The further forwards they can go, the sloppier they can be, because the faster Keltham will probably be reading. If they produce those by rewriting another book, then maybe, if Keltham is reading through all of the 10 forwards pages, they can manage to rewrite more of that book by working in parallel, fast enough to keep up with him. Cheliax and its history, books about gods that will mention Asmodeus, books about afterlives that will mention hell. Corva Talandria should be looped in on supervising this.
The scroll shop, it transpires, is an all-purpose magic shop. It has a wizard in his 60s posted intimidatingly at the door. "What are you looking for?" he asked Fenalosa, a bit suspiciously.
I don't know yet. I have a mysterious patron who will communicate instructions either to me or to you by message.
Good morning. This is the mysterious patron shopping by scry today. My overall plan is that I'll look around your shop, stare at a lot of things, ask a lot of prices if they're not already marked, eventually buy one of the weirdest scrolls you have for sale, if sanely priced, and maybe ask you a couple of strange, not personal questions about topics like the Zon Kuthan God War. I'm first circle wizardry and fourth circle divine, but am still somewhat interested in scrolls and items that somebody like me couldn't normally use. Sound good?
He scowls even more suspiciously, but messages back. I don't want to get involved in the war. I've had enough of that. You can buy things at the listed price if that's all you want.
Then let's see what Galarian has for sale, at what prices.
It's mostly standard fare for adventurers. They're where the reliable money is. Bags of holding, muleback cords, immovable rods, insistent door knockers, acid and fire grenades, wands of cure, light wounds, swan boat feather tokens, beads of fireball and beads of force, +2 headbands, +2 belts of strength and dexterity and constitution, bracers of armor, hats of disguise, gloves of elven kind, sleeves of many garments, scrolls of death ward and protection from arrows and stone skin, and protection from energy and restoration and breath of life and rope trick and ant haul and align weapon and lead blades and endure elements.
Okay, count 1 point for Galarian just being strange, though the immovable rod at 5,000 GP and the insistent door knocker also at 5,000 GP, as some of the most fascinating bits of conceptual magic, are outside his shopping range. If the conspiracy was trying to impress him with how generally weird and surprising Galarian was, by way of reminding him how many surprising things happen after all, while keeping the alleged surprises outside his price range. Nah, Keltham doesn't actually believe that. There's some strange cheap stuff too. Lead blades doesn't actually turn blades into lead, does it? Lead is poisonous and has neurotoxic effects, as Cheliax recently announced. Has he heard anything about that?
I don't read the news, it just ruins my day for no reason. The spell makes them denser when they hit the target, which is very bad for the target, but, I think mostly in the conventional way where it chops right through them. It's a temporary transmutation, so I wouldn't expect it to have permanent effects even if it is lead.
The awful thing is, if the conspiracy is choosing to depict things this way, it's presumably because they think the ordinary Galarian they've shown him would not have smart wizards in Absalom hearing about Element 82, even after Cheliax announced it very loudly, which, for conspiracies on the level Keltham is facing, the sort that gave him a century-old history of Absalom to read on his first night in the palace, probably does mean that the rest of Galarion is actually like that. Scroll of Rope Trick sounds interesting. Can the proprietor say more about that?
The rope rises into the air and creates an extra-dimensional space at the top you can access by climbing it. Holds you and up to 3 friends. Not detectable from outside except by people seeing the rope and climbing up after you. You can't pull the rope into the rope trick. It's popular for camping.
Seems pretty weird and powerful for a second circle wizard spell. Plausibly the weirdest of the options here. He'll take that one for 150 GP. The store doesn't have anything really odd that Keltham could afford, something most adventurers couldn't use, such that purchasing it would tend to verify that the store was real, and they didn't just rush something from all of Cheliax. And he can't really blame a low-productivity economy for not stocking any but the fastest-selling merchandise. Yeah, this was actually not such a great test in the first place. Keltham shall also inquire if the wizard remembers about how long ago it was that the sky started flickering to signal the start of the God War, and if any news has reached Absalom about how Cheliax is currently doing against Nidal.
Not quite 3 months since the God War, he says, which I only know because it was pretty bloody obvious. I really don't read the news. I suppose Cheliax isn't losing too badly because we haven't had them showing up here by the thousands. He'll sell the scroll.
Rope trick won't work inside the Forbiddance, Carissa warns him once the proprietor pulls it off the shelf.
Noted. I think we're being mostly protected by Broom's God out here, not by the Forbiddance. I got close to the edge of the Forbiddance so I could watch Fenalosa teleport out, and we didn't get an invading army after me that time. Not to mention our primary theory is still that the gods on our side deliberately triggered that attack while I was outside the villa, not that Nidal detected me going outside the Forbiddance.
Sounds about right. The mind reader accompanying Keltham into the rope trick is going to need to be gaseous and also invisible, and they're going to need to wait to go in until after Keltham casts Invisibility Purge, which she predicts he'll do within about a minute of getting in there. That does mean there won't be mind-reading coverage for a brief time, but then there'll be far more valuable mind-reading coverage of someone who suspects he's not being mind-read. Conceivably, you want to get 2 rope tricks and stick me and Asmodia and any other suspected conspirators in the other one for the duration. Telepathic bond doesn't work across planes.
Sever. He has only the conspiracy's word for that. That's Keltham's entire problem. He could solve this in 5 minutes if he had a reliable outside source of information telling him what all the rules were.
He can in fact check that his spells don't work across a rope trick.
This shows neither that more powerful fifth circle telepathic bonds don't work across rope tricks, nor that the conspiracy is not just blocking his magic each time to make him think it doesn't work.
Keltham is in fact currently thinking about whether he can find a 1-inch iron helmet, and if so, if there's any reasonable way he can test whether it blocks emanation divinations. But Keltham is really not seeing a method to test that, by which he can know that the conspiracy isn't selectively blocking divinations from the helmet only when they please. If the conspiracy can fake his own spell signature on the truth spell, they can do an awful lot. And if they can't do that, truth spells are unbeatable that way, which doesn't sound like it allows Galarian to be such an untrusting wreck. This also reminds Keltham to perform a detect magic, as he's been doing occasionally, and look around the shop that way, though he's pretty sure what he'll find.
Lots of noisy, overlapping magic signatures from all the magic items. Notably, none of them except those on the hats of disguise are illusion auras. Though probably if the conspiracy is deploying a lot of illusions, it can also hide the auras of doing that.
Yes, obviously they can. Otherwise, Keltham would have detected the illusion of his god's symbol when they were faking his truth spell. Okay, if the conspiracy can fake this, they can probably fake the next thing in the sequence, but Keltham's going to try anyways, because it seems like he should, just in case. Message. Next, please head on over to Absalom's Ascendant Court. Keltham doesn't block very hard that he's planning to briefly visit a lot of temples. It's an obvious step.
Sure. Off he goes. He won't ask again about lunch, though he'll cast longing side glances at vendor carts as they go. They're going to need the greater false vision for this part. The plan is for someone to genuinely go to all the relevant places so the illusionist can grab the right visuals from that, but for Fenalosa to go to a different, them-controlled location, where the people who walk up and speak to him are actors and will respond correctly to having someone message them.
The illusionist says he's ready.
He'd better be right.
Keltham catches that longing side glance. He is very sorry. Yes, please have lunch. Keltham said he could. No, it's not great that Keltham said their next destination before that point came up. But if Keltham doesn't like that, it was Keltham's responsibility to remember what he told the other person they would do.
Then he will grab some kebabs from a vendor, shove some money into her hands, and keep going. It's significantly less than a minute's delay, all told. Soldiers are not habitually slow eaters.
It's Ione's line, I know, but should we also eat?
1.2x for ordinary, that he didn't try for a longer delay. We can have food brought here, sure, preferably something I can eat while distracted. You and Asmodia have both been quieter than I thought you would be.
It's thinking that he admittedly looked like he was focusing a lot, but he wants to see what you say. But he knows his mind might be getting red.
I think you're doing pretty well, except I'm confused about how you ended up back on the Air Masochist's real track, and I'm sad you didn't buy the book defaming Abrogale. I bet it would have been funny. Should I be talking more? You often looked about as interruptible as I feel when I'm doing crafting, and whenever I say anything, Asmodia bites my head off about how you couldn't possibly know if I'm lying, and I do realize that you're starting from the assumption that the conspiracy can conceal a lot about how magic works from you, but also it seems to me that at least some of the time you might know a clever physics-based test that can confirm that I'm right, and it'd be worth a lot of twos if you did happen to know one.
Hard to remember, with everything he's trying to keep track of simultaneously, that in the ordinary world Carissa is not reading his mind. Via the shopkeeper's claim that pornography was banned in Absalom, then passing what were obviously storefronts advertising sex work, and those two things not going together, which made me realize that the pornography ban was a conspiracy plot to prevent me from checking for erotic novels written with submissive masochists as viewpoint characters.
Oh, I just figured he was a Sarenite. I guess your version makes sense too.
The ass does neutral good have against erotic literature anyways? I know the Dathalani reason to gate perverted stuff behind a prior level of achieved perversion, namely so as to not accelerate people's natural descent into sexual corruption over time, but I bet it's not the same here at all.
They think people's natural descent into sexual corruption is bad for them, and instead of that they should strive to not descend into sexual corruption? You should probably ask one of them. I bet I'm not doing it justice.
Maybe some other time. Now that the topic has come up explicitly, the conspiracy has time to find a real Sarenite priest and get an account from them of how they defend that position.
Sure, so should I be talking more?
Probably not, in the end, if it looks like I'm currently concentrating. The thought comes to him, then, that if the conspiracy is real, and Keltham ends up deciding so, this could be some of the last conversation that they'll ever have. He dismisses the thought, not by assigning it low probability, but by assigning it low priority. Keltham does not see how thinking of such a thing will serve him in this task.
Okay. Do you in fact have any clever ideas for how to check the thing about lead and emanations? I was thinking if you have some technique to prestidigitate lead or some chemical correlate that you expect is driving the emanation effect, you could flicker it on and off faster than anyone could dispel and recast a spell to mislead you. Or maybe there's something to be done with the fact lead is denser than other metals, immersing it in water or something, and then if anyone does anything to it, the volume changes.
Hard to be sure the conspiracy wasn't messing with my experimental results, is the basic problem here. If the conspiracy exists at all, it was able to fool my truth spells on day one in such a way that greater detect magic made it look to me like my own magical signature. Maybe I should see if some scroll shop's got an arcane sight, now that I can afford one. Or if Cheliax could get a borrowable item of constant arcane sight to me in a hurry, it'd be some pretty significant evidence for Ordinary. I expect that makes the conspiracy's life a lot harder. Should have thought of that earlier. Anybody feel free to remind me to put that in, the next time I send a message to Igorian. Meanwhile, there's problems like, I know there's spells that change materials around. Can the conspiracy turn the iron in an iron helmet into something that doesn't block divination? Even if I can verify it working in one experiment, that doesn't mean they can't mess with it after I put it onto my head. Also, I expect that introducing density changes will usually come with potential energy changes. Maybe there's a way to sidestep that, but if you think of the forces you'd need to apply to a metal to pull it apart or compress it, it'd probably be pretty forceful. That means the new potential energy in the current position isn't like the old potential energy in the current position, where it's been established via experimentation that everyone on Project Lawful is of course thoroughly familiar with, at this point, that prestidigitation doesn't let you change materials in a way that greatly changes their potential energy.
Okay. I think the next thing I'd try would be sitting in an iron box with my own detect intelligence up, having requested a bunch of people stand around right outside it so that it's instantly obvious if my detect intelligence is leaking through the box. And then I'd ask for some kind of powerful metal transmutation spell and transmute the iron myself intermittently until satisfied that I was getting a read whenever I poked a hole and not otherwise.
Carissa, that works a lot better if you start out knowing for sure that the invisible Seventh Circle wizards, who can easily beat my invisibility purge, are forbidden by the law of alternate physics to flicker their interception of my detect intelligence spell faster than I can transmute the metal in the box. Yes, it's very silly and ordinary, if you know that's where you are. Conspiracy Carissa is only suggesting this because she knows she can defeat it.
Which is why it'd be so valuable to figure out an actual test you were convinced of. But if that's not one, I'll keep thinking. And if Igorian doesn't have an item of permanent arcane sight for you, I can probably make one. It'd be something like 12,000 in materials costs, which is soon to be a lot less than that.
Yeah. Part of his brain sure is increasingly convinced that things which happen on those kinds of timescales will not happen, that the happy bright future she's talking about no longer exists. Keltham really hopes that's his brain discharging a burden of gloominess brought on by things apparently going so well and a lingering belief in tropes, and not because his brain is picking up on a pattern that Keltham hasn't seen, or is refusing to see. So, Asmodia, have you figured out yet what Conspiracy Asmodia thinks of me?
I mean, mostly I've been staring at what you're doing, trying to figure out whether it reflects any laws you haven't explained yet. I think I've deduced the basic concept of why you keep asking for books. It's because it's expensive to fake a lot of those, and you can look at just a page of them in the shop, and then use that to verify the entire book already existed when they buy the book and bring it back. I bet there's some much more extensively worked law for seeing that sort of viewpoint in Dath Ilan, the work that goes into things and how to force somebody else to do a lot of work. And, yeah, Conspiracy Asmodia doesn't have to be like the Asmodia, you know, but she's a person such that I was an easy person for her to pretend to be, which is an endlessly fascinating question. There are probably not meaningless divergences between us, because all of those are extra work for her with no reason. Our favorite foods are the same. She eats the same things at breakfast. She's probably got ambitions that lean more towards world domination than getting a big share of the project, was my first thought about differences. Except she was probably more of an ordinary Ostenso student, before the incident that wasn't really Manohar. She wanted to be running something important. Well, obviously so do I, so is that even really a difference? I think she's getting something out of snuggling clothed with you, because there's other project researchers who would quickly jump for that item slot if Conspiracy Asmodia didn't have some reason to hold it for herself. Despite her incredibly busy existence leading her entire life as well as mine. Which is a lot of busyness, even taking into account that a lot of the work she pretends to do for the project is really being done by somebody else, since she doesn't have a ring of sustenance. Given that her overall personality is probably mostly similar to mine, and that I don't have unusually conspiracy-useful effects on you that I can figure out, I buy that she finds it nice to have a warm boy to snuggle. She thinks of you as an opponent in her game, probably. I can't say how much she respects you as an opponent, because I don't know how close she thinks you are to breaking out, or how much of that was because of you being smart and how much of that was just her screwing up. But I don't think she'd find it warm to snuggle you if she didn't respect you at all.
That's not by any chance a message from the true Conspiracy Asmodia to me, is it?
Ordinary Asmodia is insulted that you think anybody who could pretend to be ordinary Asmodia would ever do that. I'm just reporting Ordinary's model of Conspiracy's thoughts to you. Conspiracy would never tell you her real thoughts like that. She'd figure out exactly what I'd say, and then she'd say exactly that. Which is not the same thing because I don't know what she's actually thinking.
I know, just teasing.
She knows. She's having his mind read.
The Ascendant Court comes into view. They ended up deciding to just have Lady Avaricia do the diffraction grading and baseline art on a cloak, and then swap the Keltham-decorated cloak with that of the person who is really walking the Ascendant Court, so the illusionist doesn't have to fake that or fake how it looks in the mirror or anything. The real Lord Fenalosa is entering a different building where everyone around him is safe to message. The illusionist is pretty sure he can stitch the two together seamlessly. Greater false vision is supposed to be good for that. The temples to Iomadai, Norgorber, and Caden Kylian overlook the fog-cloaked island where the Starstone sits behind Erodin's protections.
Up first, if you can find one, Temple of Irori. Iomadai is too predictable, and the Ascendant Court supposedly had temples to practically everything a century ago.
He asks a passerby for directions, gets pointed left, goes left, there it is. The architectural style is distinctly different from that of Absalom or Cheliax. The temple is crowned with a graceful green bulb. The Chelish agent in the real court walks in, and Fenalosa walks forwards. The air is smoky, someone's burning incense.
Anyone around who looks like the salesperson or manager for Irori-related services.
There's a priest doing a channel healing for a large crowd. There's a ring out on the floor marking where to stand with the priest at the center. He raises his arms and channels. After that, the crowd disperses. A man limps over, belatedly. Next one's in an hour, the priest tells him briskly.
Can't heal or channel through this, right? Aside to Carissa.
Oh, stop being good. No.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059